can start.
Really?
No problem. All right, everyone, if we could start getting seated, please. We can get started with the topic 2 discussion. I'm going to start calling out people's names if you guys don't start getting seated. I memorized them during topic 1. So just a couple of quick logistic reminders. I think we may have some folks that may have joined us for this topic. And so if you are a patient or a caregiver and you don't have a clicker, would you mind raising your hand so that we can help you get a clicker? I think we have one right there. I would also like to remind everyone that after this topic we do have lunch, but then after that we have an afternoon session. And while we're calling it a scientific workshop, it's a little bit more technical. There is definitely a lot of interaction with the patients and the patient community, so we really encourage you guys to stay for the afternoon session if you're able to. So topic 2 is where we want to hear your experiences with current approaches to managing your condition, a little bit more specific and a little bit more on the complexity than topic 1. And including like what ways are they most effective and in what ways are they not effective and any other downsides. And similar to topic 1, we're going to have 5 panelists share their comments to kind of set the context. So Piper.
Hi, my name is Piper Beatty Welsh, and I am a 2-time double lung transplant recipient due to a genetic disease called cystic fibrosis, or CF. Just a little bit of background, CF is a recessive inherited disease that really affects the entire body, but is most commonly thought of in terms of the lungs and digestive systems, where it causes a very thick mucus to build up, leading to progressive organ damage. I was diagnosed with CF in infancy and have therefore spent my entire life dealing with the realities of complicated chronic illness. I received my first double lung transplant in 2010 at the age of 28, and my second in 2013 after a brief but intense struggle with chronic allograft rejection. I am currently 34, coming up on 3 years post-transplant with my second set of lungs. I am also a staff member at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, but I'm here today to talk about my personal experience as a lung transplant recipient. One of the things I would like to focus on today is the interplay between my routine to protect my lungs post-transplant and the rest of my body, which still suffers from complications relating to CF. I remember hearing a surgeon say, and I think Jeff touched on this, but I remember hearing a surgeon say that lung transplant should not be considered a cure, that it's actually trading one set of problems for another. In my case, I traded one part of my original disease, the lung disease, which is often fatal, for post-transplant life. But I still maintain all the other aspects of my original disease. Cystic fibrosis creates difficulties in absorbing certain nutrients and vitamins, and can also create difficulties in digestion that make it really tough to maintain steady drug levels. This has been a challenge for me personally, especially in relating to immunosuppression drugs and particularly tacrolimus. My doctors and I have tried several solutions, ranging from adjusting my digestive enzyme therapy to sublingual dosing of the tacrolimus, to actually adding on additional drugs to try to increase and stabilize the amount of the drug in my bloodstream. Especially after having gone through chronic allograft rejection once, I am acutely aware of the need for stable immunosuppression levels. This continued CF-related complication also means that my CF Care Center team remains an integral part of my care post-transplant. Another struggle for me is the ongoing steroid therapy required for maintaining my lung transplant. Because CF impacts the pancreas, it makes us naturally more susceptible to a form of diabetes known as CF-related diabetes. The steroids have definitely heightened the risk for me of diabetes-related complications, particularly because as someone with CF, I also have to maintain a very high-calorie diet. This is particularly frustrating when combined with ongoing steroid use and the potential for these drugs to cause things like calcium loss in the bones, which is also a big concern for me as a woman living with CF. In an ideal treatment world, I would love to see mechanisms of drug delivery that really target the lungs specifically through nebulizers or other direct delivery in order to help alleviate some of the problems with systemic steroid use or poor absorption issues. Additionally, working to make the post-transplant routine steroid-free and a concentrated effort on reducing the side effects and systemic damage to other systems caused by immunosuppression drugs is important, not just to make post-transplant life easier to manage, but also to improve the overall health and longevity of people post-transplant. And one other issue I'd like to just touch on quickly is emotional care post-transplant. We've been talking a lot about that today, and the importance of mental health. Managing a transplanted organ means dealing with a wide variety of effects from drugs and other changes in the body, and we as people, not just as patients, need support and attention paid to that part of the process. I was fortunate enough to have a team that recognized this challenge, even in patients like me, who are very much used to complicated medical routines and appointments. I started on an antidepressant to help me manage my anxiety around caring for my new organ and adjusting to the new normal after surgery. In the now almost 3 years since my second transplant, I've been able to find a number of effective ways to manage this additional stress and have decreased the dose of my antidepressant accordingly. However, I am extremely grateful to my doctors for proactively helping me to manage the emotional impact of the complicated medical experience of lung transplant.
Thank you, Piper. Dan?
Hi, good morning. Again, my name is Dan Bonner. I'm currently 43 years old. I'm a liver transplant recipient, class of 2005. I had a liver transplant due to a disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is basically a disease where the bile ducts in the liver will continue to close until the patient experiences liver failure and would eventually die without the use of transplant for that condition. I'm going to go a little bit off topic from my scripted comments because my scripted comments echo a lot of what has been already said. So I'm going to try to incorporate other things in here from a more scientific perspective to the best of my ability in the hopes that it would add greater value. But just like many others, I'm coming at this from a perspective of immeasurable gratitude and humility for the second chance. So I'm sure that that's already taken into consideration. Immediately following my transplant, my post-transplant immunosuppressants include prednisone, tacrolimus, and Cellcept. However, I had found out that my liver donor was CMV positive while I was CMV negative. This presented an interesting scenario because it required me to have a different medication called cyclosporine for 100 days after I was transplanted. To the best of my knowledge, I didn't think that there was any sort of negative impact to cyclosporine other than it just allowed me to continue to have a CMV positive liver when I myself was CMV negative. However, also in the hospital, I experienced a severe bout of rejection, at which time I was treated with 1,000 milligrams of solumedrol as initial protocol, which proved not to work. And then I was upgraded to a medication called OKT3. OKT3 has since been removed as a prescribed medication for rejection due to its level of toxicity that it presents to the patient. And just to sort of give a sort of quick synopsis of how toxic is it, I had met a woman in my transplant travels who had rejected multiple times, and they wanted to give her a third round of OKT3, and she refused and passed away several days later. So the level of toxicity of OKT3 is just too great and not used anymore. But what makes it sort of important for me about OKT3 is when you look at 10 years plus down the road now for someone like me, There are studies that are being done around OKT3 and the use of cyclosporine that will predict things like PSC recurrence, graft survival, and patient survival, which is something that I think that at the time the medical community was unaware of how these drugs affected not just the immediacy of the situation, but also the 5 and 10 year out timeframes that someone like me has had the benefit to live long enough to figure out. So when we're talking about drug development, it's interesting to me to think, I would like for some consideration to be given into not just treating that disease or that particular situation, but what are the impacts 5, 10 years down the road that may not come up in those initial discussions for that medication, but may come up down the road later on. In terms of my own medication treatments, though, I've been given tacrolimus, Cellcept, and prednisone, as I said. My TAC levels have been adjusted accordingly, depending on my situation. I would say the biggest concern now I have is cancer, like many of you. I had mentioned before my EBV levels have fluctuated greatly recently, resulting in enlarged lymph node in my lung, and I've been being looked at for PTLD, which is post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder, which was EBV is an indicator of that. So these are the types of things that I've personally experienced that I wanted to add that hopefully would have some value to this. And then lastly, just to talk about what I think my ideal treatment would be. My ideal treatment would be one where, like many of others, I don't have to take as many pills, I don't have to take them every 12 hours, that I would get back some energy levels that I don't currently have. I'd be able to spend some time in the sun, and as silly as it may sound, I'd love to be able to drink socially again, because as a liver transplant guy, alcohol is a big no-no. So I'm looking forward to someone who can create a medication that would allow me to drink socially again or make non-alcoholic gin. I would prefer either one. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Deborah?
My name is Deborah Daw Heffernan, and almost to the day I'm celebrating 10 years with my new heart from Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Prior to my heart transplant, I suffered 9 years of heart failure following 2 massive heart attacks, each caused by a shocking spontaneous coronary artery dissection and requiring open heart surgery. After almost 20 years with heart disease, despite no family history, being thin, fit, and having perfect health habits, like all of you, I'm very glad to be here in all its meanings. 2 disclosures. My husband is a retired founding officer of a biotechnology company. Also, I'm the author of a book featured on the 2002 Oprah show about young women having heart attacks. The next book on my transplantations experience will be out in about a year. The FDA has asked me to focus specifically on what am I doing to maintain my life with a transplanted heart. And all I can think of is that Emily Dickinson could have been writing about all of us, and in my case, definitely it's been my experience that life is so astonishing, it takes, you have little time for it to do anything else. My transplant cardiologist, Mark Summergrand, prepared Jack and me by saying, you will not be restored to the health you enjoyed before you got sick. You are exchanging one set of problems for another. While others may breeze out the door in the morning, I am already preoccupied with preventing rejection, infection, and cancer, the heart transplant graduate's main causes of illness and death, not heart disease, interestingly enough. This is the paradox of cardiac transplantation. The very operations, procedures, and daily medications that give us life also make us sick. The main culprit, immunosuppressants. From life, my daily preoccupation begins with the prevention of infection. Face masks and hand sanitizer are with me everywhere. Every cough in a crowd is a gunshot. Even a little cold can become deadly. It's taken years to establish systems and protocols for cooking, cleaning, socializing, and basic affection. Days begin with double checking, ingesting, digesting, monitoring, managing side effects of my meds, plus ordering, confirming, and sorting them. I have spent hours scheduling, preparing for, enduring, and recovering from daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual checkups, tests, and horrible procedures, all of which you know all about. My life depends on these drugs and procedures, a heart transplant graduate's primary therapies. But my life also depends on counterbalancing therapies that I've cobbled together through time-consuming trial and error, always with the permission of Mass General. My discipline begins with eating well and exercising every day, even if all I can do is twirl my ankles in the air from my sickbed. I use supplements, psychotherapy, and body therapies to help clear toxins and blockages in both body and mind, and to ease contortions and pain from multiple operations as well as the meds. But I've had no rejection episodes during the first 5 years of highest rejection risk, and I like to think I participated in that result, and no rejection episodes during the second 5 years of vascular damage risk. And now I'm more than 10 years out because I'm just a month later. I've had to let go of many aspects of normal life, including people who do not respect a fragile immune system. I hope specifically for better approaches to immunosuppression that target organ-specific response, because I think we may be further along, maybe, in that than regenerative cell biology. Generative cell biology. But living consciously is the best way I know to honor my donor, clinicians, husband, and family. And if you're interested, I can go into more of these details during a discussion period.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to participate, first of all. You guys heard me in the topic 1. My name is Jack Lennon, and I was born with post-urethral valves, which is a blockage of the urinary tract in the womb, which causes the amniotic fluid at the time the fetus's urine to back up into the bladder, up through the ureters, and then just sit in the kidneys until you're born. So literally had kidney disease all my life, so not exactly sure what normal is necessarily. But I received my first kidney transplant at the age of 7 from my father. But after 14 years of the chronic changes from a couple of rejection episodes, as well as the damage from the immunosuppression meds, that kidney failed, and I had to go on dialysis for the first time. Luckily, that was a short-lived period of time, and received a kidney from my mom in 2008. Unfortunately, that never really took. The kidney never functioned as well as what the doctors, as well as myself and family, had hoped. And despite adequate drug levels via the laboratory monitoring, I came down with antibody-mediated rejection. So a little bit of a cautious optimism with the medications. So that kidney transplant from mom only lasted 5 years as a result of that antibody-mediated rejection, and I had to go on dialysis for the second time, this time for a much longer period of time before receiving a perfectly matched kidney from my older brother, which I am now 2.5 years out from and doing extremely well, knock on wood. Thank you. And it better last a long time. I'm running out of family members. So if I've really learned one thing from listening today, as well as my own experiences, there's no such thing as a simple transplant patient. And medically, socially, emotionally, etc. And so trying to craft a medical or treatment regimen to those individual patients is extremely difficult, especially when I like to think of it in the framework of what I like to call the Holy Trinity, which is longevity, how long the organ will last, wanted to maximize the life, the health of myself as the patient, and then the quality of life associated with the longevity and health and the treatment regimens that you have to undergo. So currently, I'm on 7 pills in addition to a monthly infusion called belatacept, which is the main immunosuppressant, which is fantastic as it has significantly decreased the worry of missing that medication dose once or twice during the week or during the month. and it's very easy for me to make the 1 hour appointment every month instead of getting caught up with friends and, oh man, I forgot my meds, I got to go back home, etc. So, one of the other things I'll mention that we got into in the first topic is managing it as a pediatric patient. There was a lot of caregivers that had to participate in my care as I grew older, and my mom still nags me and calls me just about every week, have you missed any medication doses this week? And I know, thinking ahead, I've had 3. Hopefully this one lasts for quite a while, but I know that it may not. It might not last until my time is up, per se, and so the need for more kidneys, another kidney transplant down the road is inevitable. And having caregivers at the end of, when are you able to maintain that treatment regimen yourself? And I'm sure we've all had experiences in the hospital when you can't self-advocate and you're really at the mercy of the drugs and the treatments and the providers who are giving you those drugs and treatments. And lo and behold, I work now at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in the kidney transplant program, and the doctors and nurses don't always know what they're doing. Medicine is an art and a science. And so it is a little bit of trial and error, as I'm sure we've all experienced. And so the last piece, and I think this is really sums up kidney transplant and all transplant really, is the rose bush analysis or analogy, which is, from the sidewalk of the casual observer, rose bush is really pretty, it's really nice, and that's the gift of transplant. Oh, you got your kidney, you look so much healthier. You can do all the things, you're back to normal. But there's a whole lot of work behind the scenes and a lot of thorns, a lot of scrapes and scratches that it really takes to make that rose bush bloom and be successful. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Hi, thanks, Jack. My name is Bobby. I'm a 2-time kidney transplant recipient. My first transplant, my primary disease was pyelonephritis. I had my first transplant in January of 1983. Due to their protocol back then, I had my spleen taken out, helping with the immunosuppression. My drugs at that time just consisted of Imuran and prednisone. However, with these medications, I was in and out of the hospital each year, at least twice a year, for acute rejection episodes. My husband, his favorite thing was to pick me up at the hospital because he wanted to see how much hair growth I had on my face. Did I have the acne come back? Did I have the buffalo hump? But he also was not sure what person he would pick up at that time because of the mood changes. So my nickname is Sybil. Okay, the second transplant, my first transplant lasted 15 and a half years. My second transplant has now lasted over 18 years. My drug treatment regimen has changed. I'm still on prednisone. I've added Prograf and Cellcept. Due to the side effects of these medications, my treatment regime also now includes blood pressure meds, Diavan and metoprolol. I take Nexium for the gastroesophageal reflux disease, Levasa and Crestor for cholesterol and triglyceride management. I also take several medications on an as-needed basis. Valcyclovir because I have suffered several bouts of CMV, and with my spleen missing, my nephrologist trusts me to be able to take that medication when I feel I need it. Otherwise, I end up in the hospital. I also take Neurontin due to a degenerative bone disease caused, of course, we blame everything on the steroids, of my spine. My new treatment regimen includes now getting an injection of Avastin, which is off-label, in my right eye due to retinal disease. Medications on my current regimen totally help manage the most significant symptoms I've experienced for transplant. For instance, if I don't take my Nexium, I can't eat or I can't swallow. If I don't get the shot of Avastin every 4 to 6 weeks, my eyesight in the right eye becomes distorted, and I'm unable to drive and carry out everyday activities. My post-transplant regime has changed from the first transplant to the second, all dictated, as we all know, by the medications. Due to the 33 years of steroids, I see a retinal specialist, as you know, on a regular basis, a gastroenterologist due to treating irritable bowel syndrome and GERD, a urologist to treat the increased episodes of UTI, and a dermatologist. Keeping a structured treatment regime has so improved my ability to do specific activities in my daily life. Because of this, I can continue to practice as a nephrology nurse and practice, of course, a wife, which I'm not perfect, and a mother. My current treatment regime is such a small commitment to the benefits that I reap. I honestly do not think there are any downsides to the current treatment regimen. Sure, it does get difficult, annoying, and frustrating keeping up with all the multiple physician appointments and the multiple medications. But reality is, if I don't do it, I lose the kidney, and I'm back on dialysis, as we all know, and my quality of life would suffer. Adhering to a strict treatment to me is easy, and it's a win-win situation. Because of transplant, I've been able to live a life that has enabled me to dream. But I thought at 23 years old, I wouldn't live to middle-aged. In my opinion, the ideal treatment for a patient, a transplant patient, would be to take a medication only once a day, and I know you all have heard that. But being a nurse, a nephrology nurse in the field, and working with patients in the CKD realm, I see recurring patients that are losing their transplants because of not taking the medication. I wish there was more data, more studies for the patients that have had their transplants for over 10 years, because I believe that's when the non-compliance or the non-adherence starts. I want to thank, again, as we all do, the FDA for putting this together. If there is a change, I would like very much that you get a drug that has, of course, less side effects, but get us to where we're not taking as much steroids. I don't mind taking the other drugs, but the steroids, over time, as we all know, cause so many problems. So thank you very much.
I want to thank all of our Topic 2 panelists. I think you guys really provided us with rich detail on the complexities of your treatment regimens, and it's going to be a great foundation to kick off the rest of the discussion. I saw a lot of head nods, so I think what we heard here, at least one of their stories, definitely resonated with all the patients and the caregivers in the audience. Is that about right? Yeah. Okay. I think we have a polling question. Thank you. So let's see. Have you ever used any of the following drug therapies to manage your organ transplantation? I'm not quite as skilled as Bobby here with pronunciation, so I'm just going to give you the brief. A, calcineurin inhibitors. B, glucocorticoids. C, purine antagonist. D, mammalian targeted vapamycin inhibitors. E, antidepressant drugs. F, opioid pain medication. G, other drug therapies not mentioned. And H, I'm not taking any drug therapies. You guys can check all that apply.
And does anyone need a clicker?
Oh, we need one more. Okay, nearly all of you guys have taken a calcineurin inhibitor. Nearly all of you guys have taken glucocorticoids. 73% with the purine antagonist. Nearly 50% other drug therapies not mentioned. What are some of these other drug therapies not mentioned? I do want to point out that we do have a follow-up polling question that will talk a little bit about the non-drug therapies as well. So just the drug therapies. Would someone mind letting us know some of the others?
Yeah, I've added valacyclovir to my regimen. I've had a couple of occurrences of the shingles, and I can't take the vaccine since it's a live virus as an organ recipient.
Thank you, James. Anyone else? Yes, Lindsay.
Rituximab pre and post-transplant.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay.
I've taken the Valsite, the Noxafil, which I guess is I never remember the big long names. So,
You're in good company.
and I'm trying to, there are other viral or antifungals, I think, that I mentioned.
Okay. Okay, so what are some of the biggest downsides that you guys have seen with these treatments? Maybe the side effects, the most significant side effects? Nicole?
I saw immediately after transplant was the weight gain with prednisone. I probably gained 40 pounds in a month. So that was the biggest one for me.
See a lot of head nods with that.
Hi, my son, my 5-year-old, had the kidney transplant. The biggest issue we've had is the mycophenolate, the CellCept. He became so neutropenic post-transplant about 3 months. It just kept going down, down, down until he basically had nothing left, and at that point then picked up a blood infection, which then, sends into a whole nother set of issues. But the CellCept has given him issues since the very beginning. And his team, thankfully, they took him off the CellCept, and he did pretty well without the CellCept, but it's not a long-term therapy for him. So we're back on the CellCept, and it's a constant issue and concern that it's not going to work.
Thank you.
CellCept, I am on it now, but I would urge the FDA and folks on this panel to study it more in pediatric patients. And the person that just spoke, I lost my second kidney because of mycophenolate. And at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children, the transplant program pretty much fell apart in the late 90s. I want to say almost 80% of the kids lost their livers, kidneys, hearts, because of mycophenolate, and particularly on the hemoglobin side, and our hematocrits dropped down to mine dropped to 4 and 5. So I'm very hesitant. I take it now, but for the mother who just spoke, I would be very hesitant. I'll tell the FDA people to keep your kid on mycophenolate. I don't think you guys have properly tested it on pediatric patients.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Jim Gleason. The prednisone, what a great roller coaster ride that was in the beginning, huh? But in our program, I got off that in 3 months, and as I hear some of the long-term effects of that, I truly am blessed 22 years later not to have any of those issues anymore. Cyclosporin was the saving grace back in the early 90s especially, and so when that got toxic to the kidneys, it was great to find that there were now some new medications on the program they could move over to, tacrolimus. Of course, the negative of that is, while I thought everybody that complained about diabetes, how could that be? Not everybody gets diabetes. Well, guess what? Now I have diabetes for the past 10 years, and I understand that even better. So the negative of that is the diabetes.
Thank you. So how many folks in the room have concerns about effectiveness with these treatments? Is effectiveness a concern? Maybe a show of hands? I've got 10 to 15 for those on the web, if you can't see. Can you talk to us a little about some of those concerns?
And again, my name is Layla. And maybe because I'm a newbie, I have a much different perspective. I'm doing well on my immunosuppressants and prednisone. I was even on a 200 milligram taper initially after transplant because of the thickening of the wall of my ureter. And I didn't gain much weight. I'm still on prednisone, and I'm 9 months out, and I've been on prednisone all my life due to asthma, and I tolerate it well. And besides the Prograf issue initially I had after transplant that dropped my hemoglobin and platelets, other than that, I feel like the cyclosporin and the CellCept I'm on have been doing very well, and I have very minimal side effects. So while, you know, it's important to hear about the negatives, I think it's also encouraging for the researchers to continue to do the research and hear from the patients that are doing very well on these drugs.
We have, that whole table is very active.
Thank you. Again, my name is Austin Lee, and had 2 kidney transplants. And I just want to say for the CellCept, as far as like the negative I had, because I had only took it for maybe about a month when I had my second transplant, because it gave me like leg cramps, and then like my nephrologist from Children's Hospital, she automatically switched me to a medication called Myfortic. You guys probably heard about it, and I've been doing fine on that, and actually, I mean, it was kind of interesting because I used to take cyclosporin, but I took cyclosporin with my first transplant, and now I take tacrolimus, so I didn't really understand that, but that was just about it.
Thank you. We'll take one more, maybe. I think we have Kevin.
Yeah, this is Kevin Fowler. I guess my question is not so much directed towards the side effects of these medications or effectiveness, but just a general comment that there really are not a lot of options available for patients and physicians. So that's my 2 cents. And then related to that, then too, is that, you know, I'm on a regimen of Prograf for 12 years, but is that really the best regimen? Would Bellatacet be a better regimen for me at this point? Doctors really don't know.
Thank you, Kevin. So one of the main topics of discussion for our scientific discussion this afternoon is going to be medical adherence, but we would like to touch upon that a little bit right now with all of you. What are some of the biggest challenges you guys have in maintaining, you know, your adherence to some of these treatments and your treatment regimen overall? Any significant challenges? Oh, yes, Bobby.
I think the big thing, I don't know how you guys feel about, is taking these medications at the same time every day, especially the Prograf. And I don't know if any of you guys do it, but I stay on brand. My doctor, I do not want generic. So I stay on brand Prograf and CellCept.
Okay. Anyone else? We have Nicole and Kevin.
One of the things that Bobby brought up about Prograf and CellCept staying on brand, and this also goes into what he was discussing about the mycophenolate. I was at Baylor Transplant Center last week in Dallas, and they brought up a good point that I never considered, and this is a question, I guess, maybe for the FDA. Also, there was one gentleman who lost his transplant after 19 years because the pharmacy that he was made to go to changed the vendors of the generic brands every 4 months, whoever had the lowest bid. So because the generic was changed, and I almost believe that that was mycophenolate, because I've noticed that once I changed from CellCept to mycophenolate, now my kidney is 90% scarred. Are there, again, I believe maybe the research was not done properly with mycophenolate, and what are you doing about making sure that there are protocols to say you cannot continue to change generic vendors to these pharmacies and things like that?
Well, I think you're raising an excellent, broader question that is very much noted, even if we can't discuss it today, but bringing out your concern about I'm going to say the interchangeability of these medications, as well as their just study in general and the protocols for that. So we will definitely note that as a concern that you have, and we had a lot of head nods here. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you, Nicole. I think we have one.
In regards to the last question, I think the broader issue is how much alike are generics, because my understanding was that a generic was supposed to be the exact same formulation with the same standards as the name brand. But in regards to timing, I find getting it coordinated with food, especially for the diabetic medication, is a challenge.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to follow up with the pediatric perspective. Any striking differences as far as medical adherence? Anyone?
Yeah, actually. So, like mentioned, I work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital as the program manager, and so what we're finding in particular is that children want to be normal. They don't want to be seen as different, and so part of it is the psychological. I'm different. I have to take medications. The other big piece is there's no immediate sensation of the medicine working. Right? You take a Tylenol or a ibuprofen for a headache, headache will go away, right? Or you take a medication and it's supposed to, make you feel good. There's none of that. And so by the time you start feeling cruddy, it's already too late. And so at least that's what some of the stuff we found. And again, in pediatrics, you're depending a lot on the caregiver to be able to help manage that with the patient, while also building capability within the patient to be able to manage it long term throughout transition into adulthood and long term.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Jack? Because it was raised here earlier. Briefly, you can go back to your child self and say, here's the one thing that I wish you knew then about this, that you now know and you wish you knew then. Oh, putting you on the spot for a top of mind.
I do think the balance of, which I now do because I've had to learn to do it, is the balance of now versus future, right? So the benefit, again, going back to that, what I refer to as the Holy Trinity, the longevity of the organ, the health that I'm able to maintain, and the quality of life that I have through managing my kidney transplant. There's the consideration of all of that now, and then there's also the consideration I have to look at in the future, 5, 10, way down the road, and do I really want to, when they put me on belatacept, there's no long-term outcomes yet, but in terms of my ability to adhere to a once-a-month infusion compared to twice daily meds, I don't know. I mean, we'll see. And that's sort of where the cautious optimism and cautious faith in some of these treatments and the providers providing them really come into play.
Thanks, Jack. So I put Jack on the spot, but for those of you here and on the web and in the room, those of you that have had transplants in childhood or in young adulthood and have worked your way and now you're in your midlife, or you're closer to my age, and thinking back on your transition, please put that in the docket because it's really, it was asked by a researcher who wants to really understand what goes on in your head and what you wish you would have known then. So
Definitely. Graham, do we have any web comments?
So we've been getting a lot of input on the web again, so thank you for providing some input. So on side effects, a few things mentioned, developing hernias after physical therapy, developing stress fractures after taking steroids or needing hip replacements, cataract surgery as well, problems with attention and staying focused. Several people also mentioned weight gain side effects from prednisone specifically, also acid reflux. Other people mentioned nausea more generally, hair loss with Prograf, also diarrhea and other drug interactions, mood swings, vascular necrosis, diabetes, swelling, damage over time, things like that. For adherence, we heard things about difficulty with regular use at the proper time, with coverage issues again, uncertainty over generics, and a few other specific drugs are mentioned and some non-drug therapies.
Thank you, Graham. I think we have time for one more comment.
I'd like to go back to adherence for just a moment, and I think it relates to the elephant in the room. We haven't talked about cost as yet. I've lost friends and known people that have skipped doses because they can't afford to buy all of them. We actually, the Alpha One Foundation did a survey of our patients. We have a note from one of our patients who indicated that Medicare had taken CellCept off his list of drugs that he could have because it was not approved for lung transplant, and his Blue Cross plan then went along with that. So lots of issues, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point today. terms of being able to pay for the drugs and the cost of insurance and finding insurance and all of that. But
Thank you, Mary. I think, okay, maybe one more.
Hi, this is Ellen Griffith Cohen again, and one of the, as I'm listening to this, when I got my transplant in January, now first of all I should say I got it from my brother. He was HLA identical to me, and I had not yet gone on dialysis. It was preemptive, so I was in great shape except for my kidneys failing. You know, whenever I'd see something saying, "How is your health?" Great, except my EGFR is way down. But one of the things we've talked about is the anxiety post-transplant. Now, my first anxiety was if they hadn't sewed it in properly and it was going to acute reject like across the room. There it would go, you know. And it took me a long time to trust that it was really sewn in there. But one of the things that's been mentioned several times is this, 12 hours exactly on time all the time. When I got home, I sort of looked at it and I said, okay, I have all these things that can freak me out, and I'm going to assume, and then I cleared it with my clinic, that this 12 hours exactly on time really means actually relatively exactly on time. And I really kind of target about an hour of leeway. And again, I've cleared this with my clinic. My labs are absolutely stable. And I'm not putting the pressure on myself to do it perfectly every single day. I always carry in my purse my evening meds so that, because my first foul up after my transplant was I went out to dinner at someone's house and then realized I didn't have my meds with me, and I had to eat and run. But I always have my evening meds with me. I always separate my Prograf out on the day that I'm going to do lab work so that I don't take it with my morning meds. But the terror that is put into patients about compliance, and especially once you find, if you go to the hospital, compliance goes out the window because, and that's true, by the way, and I don't know whether that's in the FDA or the Medicare area, but when patients are managing a chronic disease at home, whether it's dialysis or whether it's, and there are 10% of patients dialyze at home, or whether it's post-transplant, once you go into the hospital, you lose all control over your own disease. And one of the things that some of us are pushing for now is that the treatment needs to follow the patient into residential settings. If I am doing home dialysis, I should be able to do it when I go into the hospital. If I'm doing my medications at home and managing my medications at home, I should be able to manage them when I'm in the hospital and not have to have my care affected by other people's noncompliance.
Thank you. Thank you. So both our topic 2 panelists and all of our topic 1 panelists really talked about the whole management of post-transplant life. And while the treatment regimens played one part, we also had a lot of non-drug therapies mentioned as well. So let's talk about those a little. I think we have one polling question to set up the discussion. Besides the therapies mentioned previously, what are you doing to manage any symptoms you have experienced because of your organ transplantation? A, dietary and herbal supplements. B, diet modifications and behavioral changes. C, complementary or alternative therapies. D, physical or occupational therapy. E, exercise and other physical activities. F, over-the-counter products. G, other therapies not mentioned. H, I am not doing or taking any therapies to treat symptoms. Okay, so we have nearly 80% diet modifications and behavioral changes. I think we touched upon that a little bit during our topic 1 discussion. E, we have exercise and other physical activities. 56% dietary and herbal supplements, and then nearly 50% for over-the-counter products. So by a show...
Can we just say on the web? Did we get?
Oh, sure.
66% for dietary and herbal supplements, 80% for diet modifications, 24% for complementary or alternative therapies or physical therapy, 68% for exercise, 45% for over-the-counter products, and 18% for others not mentioned.
So tracking
Very
very
similar.
closely.
Yeah, very similar. So by a show of hands, how many would say that collectively the non-drug therapies or lifestyle changes give you as much or more overall benefit as your medications? Okay, let's count. Oh, goodness. I'm going to say that was around 15 hands, maybe 20. How many would say that your non-drug therapies are important, but they can't match the benefit of your medications? More hands in the first one. Okay, maybe we'll say 25, maybe 30. Okay. The paper went flying. How many, one more, show of hands. Thinking about all of your therapies together, how many feel that you are managing your condition well right now? A lot of hands. Okay, so for you guys that have raised your hands, how do you guys define being managed well? In your definition, what does managed well mean?
So for the web, he's out, you're saying you're out 26 and a half years. You're still living. Okay.
I'm out 17 years, but my basic parameter is the results of blood testing. When I actually go into the doctor, I'm the same as I'm sitting here. It's only when we get those blood results back that there's any kind of real discussion. So.
Okay. Other folks?
Define it as one, not being on dialysis. I don't view that as an alternative. And then second, I'm working. That's how I measure success.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Layla. I would say a lot of trial and error. And initially, after I got my transplant, I was up on a treadmill like a few weeks after transplant. I was in the gym. I'm like, oh, I'm healthy again. I have all this energy. But then I'd get my blood work back and my creatinine would spike. So I think, just even with the meds and eating right and living a stress-free life, I think it all plays a major role in how you view your outcomes of your medications. I know that when I'm eating better and I'm exercising and I'm feeling better, I feel more compelled to take my medicine because I see an outcome and I see a hopeful life and future for myself.
I think for lung transplants, it's, your spirometries are continuing to be good, or your biopsy, there's no rejection. That's, there's always bumps and, and few hospitalizations, I guess.
Okay.
You said acute, okay, go ahead. Acute hospitalization? Fewer.
Sure. I think we have, Dan, you want to go first?
I think when we talk about success, though, in terms of non-therapies, whether it be exercising or meditation, by and large, I think that comes down to the individual. There hasn't been a doctor who has come to me that said, have you ever tried meditation? Have you tried exercising? There's just an innate desire that says, I want to live longer. And, traditional studies will say, well, if you eat right and exercise, then that'll happen. So I think so when we talk about success, I think you do have therapeutic success, and then I think you have non-therapeutic success, but I think the non-therapeutic success is much more difficult to quantify or qualify because it really comes down to each individual and how much time and effort they put in to do that. And I say the differentiation because I've never been, no doctor or institution has come to me and say, let me put you in touch with an exercise therapist, let me put you in touch with a dietitian, let me put you in touch with, a physical therapist that we think would contribute to the overall longevity of your organ, your health, your life, whatever it may be. So I do think that when we're talking about these success factors, it now becomes very individualized. And I think that you have to be sort of very specific to each individual of how much time and effort they put in and how much success they're getting out of it.
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to say that you really have to look at management under two different conditions. One, I've known people who go through chronic and acute rejection all the time and never ever do well, and that to me would be you're not managing, the drugs are not managing your transplant, but dealing with side effects from the drugs that you take that you knew were going to happen anyway. I think that's a matter of acceptance. These things are going to happen, it's part of it, and that's it. But there's a huge difference between acute and chronic rejection type things versus side effects from medications.
Okay, I think Bobby, you wanted to.
I have to agree with Kevin in regards to, I think we all have to define what success is to us. And after my first transplant, I set goals. The kidney was working, I took my medication, I was doing fine, but I set goals. It was like, I want to become a nurse. I want to advocate for myself. I went to school. I think stuff like that to me is a success, that I'm able to complete the goals, but yet my health still stays good. And I can work, which I couldn't before.
Let's take,
Hi, my name is Letitia Felix. I'm 15 months transplanted. I think that when we talk about managing kidney, by the way, when we talk about managing, it started long before our transplants. It started during the onset of our need for any kind of transplant. So I think it's continuous. I think that this is where the anxiety, the stressors come in. It's continuous. For those of us that are kidney patients, even if a high-risk donor was involved, there was still some maintenance, some management that you did in order to qualify. It is quantitative in its effects on you, whether you're setting personal goals to manage that. Indeed, scientifically, your labs will show whether or not your body is in compliance. Again, keeping in mind also the mindset. Although you're not being referred to a dietitian, maybe you should be, because we know that altogether things that work good for our new bodies to maintain our old vessel. So I thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. So I know most of you guys raised your hand saying that you believe that your condition is being managed well. Was there anyone that believed that they're not being managed well right now? Maybe what aspects of your condition these therapies are not managing well specifically? Kevin?
The whole point is, what do we really have to compare, right? So, I mean, that question is, there has to be another category in there. What's the comparison? I mean, there's essentially one gold standard right now in the marketplace. And unless you have other options for patients and physicians, it's very difficult to answer that question.
Okay. I think we have one more.
on the web, if you can comment. Often in these meetings, it's the folks who are pretty well managed who are able to come and attend and join us in person. And when we're talking about things that are not well managed, we need to draw heavily from the web, from those of you on the web, or contributions to the docket. If you share the stories of someone you know who has not been well managed, or encourage them to put their comments in.
I'll just add real quick that we've had several people on the web wondering that exact question on whether or not the webcast has a difference in terms of condition being well managed or not. And several people have said that their adherence issues or symptoms seem to be somewhat more severe on a relative scale.
Thank you. And keep
May I pop in for a minute about the maintenance regime? My experience is that most doctors have no clue how to take care of themselves in terms of basic health. And the medical schools and that training has encouraged that. This is changing, thank heavens. But when it comes to you've been transplanted, this is great, we're focusing on all your biochemistry reactions, the mix of drugs, time to go home. And so we go home and we're faced with piles of drugs. How do you get them organized? And I think simple assistance with systems would help patients tremendously. I'll never forget when my husband said, let's just make this card table for all the drugs. And that began my system of having a separate place to deal with my transplanted life, and therefore to psychologically separate my real life from the life of someone who's chronically ill.
But in terms of the additional weight on our time of taking care of ourselves despite the medications and the procedures, that's all on the patient. Nothing's documented. We're out there on our own. We're figuring it out. I see the most terrifying things on chat rooms. And I think that this is an area that needs to be developed. You're home. Now, how do you manage it? How do you explore things that will help you without hurting you that come from the complementary world?
Thank you. I think we have one more right here.
Hi, I'm Ellen Griffith, Cohen again. I probably didn't get reflected in the 19% with other therapies not mentioned because I hit the button just about the time you were tabulating it. But both in the pre-transplant area and in the transplant area, I think, and this doesn't go to your drug development, but it goes to understanding the lives of transplant patients, that chronic disease is isolating. Chronic disease where you need a transplant, and especially if there's a possibility of living donor transplant, is incredibly isolating because particularly people get angry because their friends say they'll step up and then they don't, or their families won't step up and they get mad at their families. You become, every other one of these things is an individual thing. The fact is that maintaining a support system pre-transplant and post-transplant is a critical therapy. It reminds me every time I am with my support system that I am important. And when I get low, or I think, I don't want to do this anymore, or whatever, and I can do that even with my transplant because of my depression, the reminder that I am a valued member of this society and that people care about me is critical to adherence, that you take your drugs not just because of you, but because of the people who love you. My support groups include online groups, but it's also my church. I go to a transplant support group, and in fact, tomorrow night we're going to be talking about spirituality and transplants. But that whole area is so critical.
Thank you. I think I have one more follow-up question. By a show of hands, how many of you had to change or stop medication? Okay, I have around 20, 25. A few more went up. Okay. Why did you have to change or stop your medication? Some comments on that?
As I said, the cyclosporin initially is toxic to the kidneys, and when the kidneys started showing that, we were fortunate enough to have new medications. This is back in the around 2000 timeframe, and so tacrolimus became the switch. Yes, it's toxic to the kidneys, but in a different way or less so.
Okay, thank you. One more all the way back there.
Kevin Longino, I'm 12 years out from a kidney transplant. I had the same issue after about 6 years, cyclosporin.
Thank you. I had one more, and then I have a follow-up question.
Mike Garrett. I, back in the Stone Age, it was prednisone and cyclosporin and Imuran, and then they got the brilliant idea to switch me over to Prograf and Cellcept, and I actually did better on the Cellcept or the cyclosporin and Imuran, but it was mostly because the doctors didn't know how to prescribe the Prograf. And I got very toxic for about 6 months because of too much Prograf until I finally found a physician who knew what she was doing and brought the levels down, and things worked out very well since then.
Thank you, Michael.
So can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Those of you who have talked about your switching, or even if you haven't raised your hand, what goes through your mind when it says here that your drug's not working the way it should be doing? What are you thinking about at that moment? Here, your drug's not working. If I've asked a hard question, change the question around, however makes sense for you. I think we have someone.
Hi, this is Michael Middleman. Again, now that I'm an adult, and once I probably turned 15, I started reading pretty much every scientific publication I could on the medications, because I will never ever trust one that a physician gives to me again until I see and believe the efficacy for myself, given what happened with the Imuran change to CellCept as a child. So my feeling is always, why change if I'm doing well? Like, don't change my medications at all, and that's my current doctor's thoughts is, everything's doing so well, there's no need to put you on a different one. So I won't do anything until I see like proven results of it on the market.
Okay, thank you.
I was on, Tom Gemmel, I had a heart transplant 2008. I was on CellCept, and I lost all that weight I always wanted to lose on that drug. And they decided to stop it, and it's there, well, God, I hope there's another drug that's going to work. I mean, that was the first thought with it. But one of the things I've heard here, and I feel great empathy for everybody, I'm a veterinarian, and I think you need a medical degree before you go through this stuff. I mean, the people here that don't have that background, I feel for them, because it's such an overwhelming amount of information, understanding the drugs, how they work, what they work, alternative therapies. It's just a huge challenge for people that don't have a sophisticated level of training. And, you know, it's a lot of hard work to understand that. And even if you have the training, it's so specific to the disease. I mean, I'm a generalist as a veterinarian, but I certainly learned a lot because I had a 40-year warning that I was going to have a problem. So, you know, it was, God, is there another drug that'll work?
Great, thank you. I think we'll take one more, maybe Lindsay? Layla, I'm so sorry.
You're fine. And see, I was going to talk about something else, but now to piggyback off what he said, I actually was in school to be a nurse anesthetist before I was diagnosed with FSGS out of nowhere. And just that background in microbiology and anatomy, that definitely helped me as I could communicate with a lot of my physicians. And I had some knowledge, and I really worry about, you know, what would my life have been like if I hadn't even had the small foundation that I did have to understand. And I find that sometimes healthcare providers, they kind of undermine your intelligence and what they think you may be able to absorb about these medicines. And I would like to be more educated on why specifically CellCept works the way that it works differently than Prograf, just on a level that a patient can understand, because I think that will also help us to be more compliant, because instead of just blindly taking medicine because someone says, hey, this will work, you know, I'd like to know why specifically and where does it work.
How about I was going to ask the pediatric perspective.
Yes, of course. That's
Okay.
why I was going to do the same thing.
One of our pediatric spokespeople, if anyone wants to volunteer an opinion, or even the caregivers maybe, what's running through your mind when they say that your child might have to change or stop a medication?
So I am probably not the only one in here who has been on cyclosporin, Rapamune, Prograf, and now belatacept. I've been on the gamut, in addition to some of the other ones that were mentioned. And it's what I've come to realize, and this is how my parents trained me as part of the care team, which is to look at the provider as an advisor of how to manage your care. And so taking what they say as their advice, this is what you should change to, asking those intelligent questions, why should I change to this? What's the data, right? And then taking that back, thinking, reflecting on it, thinking about it, and then, moving forward with a decision, with your doctor in collaboration. So I think a lot of it, I know we pre-visit plan on all of our patients the week prior coming in, and we have our standard protocols of what we think people should be on, what these kids should be on. And a lot of times the doctors are like, man, I don't know why that's working, but it's working. Don't rock the boat, right? And then there's other times where they're like, oh my gosh, we've tried every single thing that we can possibly imagine, and we still can't get it to work. And so part of it, I think, is just that the communication between the patient and the providers. I mean, it's it's hard to hear as a patient, but it's also somewhat reassuring that when a physician says, I sort of don't know what's going on, and can we try this, right, as an option, instead of dictating what's going to happen, can we work together to try to figure out a solution?
Thanks, Jack. Anything from the web, Graham?
We've been hearing a lot of very similar perspectives, nothing else different.
Okay, great.
We're going to keep moving forward. We do want to make sure to allow for a few phone calls from people who aren't able to join in person and who are on the web. And so if we're going to tee up the phone, we'll open the phone line for 2 or 3 callers in about 5 minutes. And what we really like to ask, and you guys can think about this too, is what that maybe hasn't been mentioned yet. If you could improve treatments, what would that ideal treatment? What's something about treatments that would improve? So, but before we do that, we want to get a little bit of more, wrap up the insight into your treatment decision making that we've been talking about for the last few minutes. And we have a polling question to do that. Graham, can you move to the next polling question? Thanks. Get another long one. In addition to preventing organ rejection, of the factors that we have listed here, would you rank as most important to your decisions about using a therapy to manage your organ transplantation? So you can choose 2 of the following items. We understand that we would need 5 slides to put up all the factors that go into your thoughts, but these were the ones that FDA wanted to know how you might think about in comparison to one another. So of the 2, A, frequency of administration of the drug, such as twice a day versus once a day, or infusion versus B, the common side effects. C, the possibility of rare but serious side effects, such as nerve or liver damage. D, the possibility of interactions with medications for other conditions that you have. E, your access to the treatment, for example, insurance coverage. Or F, some other consideration that you think is really critical. So the most prevalent in the room is the common side effects of the treatment, followed by the possibility of rare but serious side effects, and of course an access, which lower considerations in the room of the frequency, the interactions with other health conditions. Of course, that's dependent on what other health conditions you have, we know. On the web, what are we hearing?
61% say common side effects, 48% say possibility of rare and serious side effects, 17% say possibility of interactions with medications, 69% say access to treatment, 8% said other, and 0% said frequency.
We have covered a lot of these topics today, already this morning, and I think we'll be talking about the administration issues, how the drug is taken in the afternoon as well. Let me turn to my FDA colleagues. Anything on here that you would like to follow up on or ask? Okay. You guys, this has been such a rich discussion already. It's leaving us speechless. It takes time to absorb all of this. So then let's turn to in the room here, think about, as much time as we can take. We're going to take the hard stop at 12:30. So you might not be able to ideal therapies, but we will try to work this into the afternoon as well. But let's take a few phone calls on this, and I have to say this. Operator, can we open the phone line? Can we take our first caller, please?
Hi there, Vanita. You can go ahead.
Okay, we will let you answer this question.
Hi, Danny. This is Jack talking to you. So the once a month infusion is called Belatacept. Good? Okay. It's also which I believe is the sort of street name for it. It's also called Nulogix. And so the side effects, at least initially published, and again, there's not a whole lot of long-term data on it, but some of the effects, at least in the first year, is a higher rate of rejection within the first year post-transplant, and then decreased rates of rejection post. And then you get your somewhat common side effects of an infusion medication, which are mostly tied around to the actual infusion itself. So you get your headache, you get your swelling at the site of the infusion, etc. And if anybody has more information, chime in.
No, well, we don't have to. It doesn't have to be. Meeting was never focused too much on the technical aspects of drugs, so we will let that go. I'm going to assume that the question was raised about infusion. As a question of exploration for those of you who have not done that as a possible alternative. Is there another caller?
Phyllis, your line is open.
Okay, yes. Hi, this is Phyllis Bryant. I'm a living donor of a recipient who has survived for 16 years post-transplant, recently rejected. We did our transplant out of state up near you at Georgetown and had to have follow-up here in North Carolina. And I'm going to make comment as to what we can do to improve treatment in terms of long-term treatment and what would a ideal treatment plan consist of. I would like to also add that I think we need to do more to facilitate long-term treatment across state lines between different transplant centers for especially living donor situations where we've had to go out of state and both donor and recipient may live in different states, or the recipient could get treatment locally and even long-term. As I said, one of the reasons my recipient rejected was simply being able to get local care at a local transplant center was way more difficult simply because he didn't have the transplant at that institution. So anything we could do to improve treatment for recipients locally, even if they haven't had the transplant locally, I think should be incorporated into an ideal treatment model. I think that should be included.
Thank you, Phyllis. And you're reiterating a point that we've heard that has been sort of underlying all of this is you could have the best drugs, but in this case, for the organ transplant, it is the overall care and your ability to access the care and manage the complexity across the whole complicated system you're in. So thank you, Phyllis, for that. Do we have one more caller?
We had somebody who submitted a question earlier who couldn't call in, specifically about the flu shot, and wondering, they're a senior, and they're wondering if they're on immunosuppressants, whether or not they should get a regular flu shot, the higher strength senior flu shot, or neither.
Well, so I will just reiterate that this is not a forum for giving out medical advice. Unless my panel, we will have to leave that as a conversation between your health care provider or a health care provider. But it does raise, in each question there's a point to be made, and this one raises a very important point about how do you manage even very simple things. I can just go and get my flu shot, and you have to think a lot more about that. So we'll take that point out of the question. Any final questions? We're going to continue in the afternoon. Okay, so let's come here to We'll hold this thought and we'll go to
Well,
Teresa's question.
I didn't think quick enough last time when Sarah asked us, but in looking at the polling results, I would, and how the common side effects of treatment were both on the webcast and here, the highest ranking in terms of most important to your decision. I wonder if our patients could say more about what common side effects would you most like to avoid that maybe you've experienced with your current therapy. But if that's the highest ranking one, is there even among those common side effects ones that are particularly high ranking you'd like to avoid in a treatment?
We're going to go the lightning round with this. So no, not much explanation, just name out the side effects. Nausea, okay, I heard. Fatigue, here. What is it? Tremors, okay, thank you, Lindsay. Diarrhea, okay. Damage to the organ. Neurotoxicity or damage to another organ. Okay. Hey, that lightning round worked. Okay, we have one more person who hasn't had much, has a topic, so.
Thank you. My name is Miklos Ruschak. I had a bilateral lung transplant 8 months ago at HUP. And we have not really talked too much about rejections. I experienced 2 different types of rejections. Fortunately, very low level. Both of them are A1 rejections, but the topic is very important because your option is either you die or you get another organ. I like to share my experience because I think it could be educational for others. The first one I had a so-called de novo HLA DSA, which really means that it was an HLA type of antibody rejection, which was developed after the transplant. And the DSA just stands for those who don't know donor-specific antigen. And if the B cells which are producing this, they produce sufficient number, then eventually these HLA antibodies could attack the lung, and this potentially could lead to graft failure. So I was very happy that where my transplant was done, my doctors immediately, even though my rejection level was low, immediately attacked the problem, and I received a treatment which is off-label for FDA, but because it is a clinical hospital, they were able to use a drug which was approved for several other uses. It is rituximab, and this rituximab was administered 4 times during a month, weekly, and did a wonderful job. My level dropped from 38,000 to 2,100 over the course of like 6 months. And under 3,000, it means that essentially you don't really have any kind of antibody level rejection, but it keeps going down. So I hope that this never comes back, because logically, I sort of read about that, how it works, and the way how it's supposed to work, that essentially the immune system recognizes my donor lung right now as a friend, at least from the point of antibody creation. So it would no longer generate those antibodies. The B cells, which have been destroyed, like about 95% were destroyed, and the new B cells apparently are not recognizing the donor lung as an enemy. So what I like to do is to make sure that others have access to this kind of therapies, because I have a feeling that there are so many hospitals which are doing transplants, and they are not licensed to do this. If they are not licensed, any other drug is available, I'm not sure, but this targeted therapy, I think this is really the future. This is the future in cancer therapy, but this is a future also dealing with this kind of rejection issues. The other rejection I have is like again A1, but it's a cellular level rejection, and the only thing we can do is monitoring. It's just a little annoying that I have to go every couple of months. I have to do bronchoscopy. I mean, that's a pain. If somebody could invent some other ways of monitoring, it would be great. Thank you.
And off-label products. We will make a note of that. We'll take one more quick one because you haven't had too much of a chance, and then we're going to stop for lunch. So,
thank you. My name is Mital Gandhi. I had a transplant 6.5 years ago. A kidney. Sorry, I forgot where I am. We're talking about kidneys and hearts and lungs. It's so great to be here, so thank you for having us. But the one other thing I did want to mention in one of your questions, I know you had several, is other type of drug developments. It's not really a drug development, but I have Googled it to no end, but I'd love a portable creatinine monitor. And so at one point they are out there, and I know that the FDA has something called like a waived list of different tests that are quote unquote waived. I don't know what that means, but you know, for the consumer or for me as a patient, I would love a portable creatinine monitor. At one point, not only are they out there, but they wouldn't sell it to me because I wasn't, you know, a healthcare facility either, which is ridiculous. You know what I mean? I would pay for it, or if not me, maybe Blue Cross Blue Shield would pay for it. But that's something that would definitely help kidney patients at least.
all right. So we're ending on a great point, and we are going to end for lunch. Renata, please.
Maybe you're going to say this, Sarah, but even though the morning session is ending, I think just to echo what Dr. Cox said during the introductory comments, we seriously hope that everybody can stay for the afternoon scientific session. And we've asked Sarah and Meghna if even during the afternoon we have an interactive dialogue, because I think all of us here at the table, as well as the presenters for the afternoon sessions, really are very, very interested in hearing your comments. They've just been invaluable. You've brought up issues that probably in the back of our minds we knew were there, but you've brought them to the forefront. And for those of you who are willing to stay the rest of the afternoon, both here in the room and on the web, we really welcome you to do so. So thank you.
And with that, we'll break for lunch, and we'll ask you to be back at around, it's 1:15. 1:15. You can order lunches in the kiosk, or if you pre-ordered, pick up your lunches, and there's sandwiches available.